What's up guys, welcome to this issue of Motive Garage. Now Jet 200's been going a little bit slow lately. For the last 2 years, all I've really done is pull things off the car and prep the chassis. Well now it's finally time to start putting some things back on the car. Now we were waiting on a few little suspension bits and pieces that we needed to start the build, and while we're in America, we got all of those bits plus a whole lot more. Now we've got the complete Circuit Sport suspension catalogue thanks to Phase 2 Motor Trend. Front lower control arms, caster rods, rear lower control arms, camber, toe and traction rods. They're all rose jointed and they're all completely adjustable. There's also a 6-piston Wilwood brake kit and a whole heap of other stuff that we'll cover in later issues of Motive Garage. Now, we figured, seems the car's a bare shell, as we put the whole thing back together, it's a good chance to cover some technical aspects as we go. So in this issue, we're going to be looking at the front suspension, steering and brakes on Silvias. Now the first thing we're going to talk about is roll centre. It's a very misunderstood part of modifying a car. Now this is slightly exaggerated, but it makes it easier to demonstrate. If you look at this lower control arm in blue, from factory, they generally slope downwards from the inside to the outside. And as you lower the car, you can see it goes to horizontal. And if you lower it too far, which many people do, it then actually starts to slope upwards from the inside. This totally destroys your roll centre. So if we're lowering our car, how do we adjust this roll centre? Now the first and easiest option to modify the roll centre is to fit some type of aftermarket ball joint that spaces the lower control arm away from the knuckle. Now these Circuit Sports lower control arm, like the IKEA Formula ones, have this roll centre adjustment built in. So you can see that the lower control arm is spaced away from the knuckle to bring it back down to horizontal. Now the other bonus with these lower control arms, one, they've got adjustable lock stop so you can determine how much steering angle you have. Secondly, they're adjustable for track width so you can actually adjust the front track of the car. And thirdly, they're pillow ball so you remove all the sloppiness of the factory rubber bushes on the inside. Now the more extreme way to adjust the roll centre is to essentially lower the chassis over the suspension instead of just simply lowering the suspension through the coilover or the lowered spring. Now I got Chris from Killer Customs to modify the front subframe by raising the inner pivot point of the lower control arm. Now basically, when you lower the car and it starts to go up, instead of lowering the outside of the arm, you're raising the inside of the arm. So all up, we've gained 15 mil of adjustment just from the inner pivot point and 25 mil from the outside. So 40 mil in total of roll centre adjustment, which is heaps. Now with that much roll centre adjustment, the lower control arms and the caster rod will pretty much be horizontal even though the car is very, very low. Now another added bonus of that is as you go over bumps, you actually don't get as much of a change in caster and camber, helping keep the alignment more consistent, therefore better handling. Now the next problem to tackle on a lowered car is bump steer. Now when you go over a bump on the car, you know the suspension moves up. Now as the suspension moves up, the distance between here and the steering rack gets longer, but the distance of the tie rod stays the same. So what that essentially does is it pulls on the knuckle and causes the car to toe out. So if you get toe out mid-corner, it actually makes the car more unstable. Now the one thing you have to remember is as you lower the car further, the problem gets even worse. Now the easiest way to fix it is with aftermarket tie rod ends. Now these Kazama tie rod ends have a spacer in between the end and the knuckle, just like on the roll centre adjuster, to move the tie rod down, space it away from the knuckle and try and get the tie rod back to level. The other bonus with these is obviously they're rose jointed and removes all the sloppiness from the steering that you get by having rubber tie rod ends. Now we've decided to take reducing bump steer even one step further by modifying the knuckles themselves. Now Nigel Petrie from the Insane Drifters is very well known in the scene for his fabrication skills and his custom and modified parts to suit the demands of drifting. Now one of his most popular modifications is his drift knuckles, as they're much cheaper than the traditional aftermarket hyper knuckles and they are great for drifting. He can modify them either mildly or aggressively, but for the S14 we asked him to modify them to suit time attack as opposed to drifting. Now where the tie rod end joins to the knuckle has been moved in 3 directions. Downwards for reduced bump steer, outwards for reduced Ackerman effect and increased steering lock, as well as inwards for faster steering ratio and increased steering lock as well. Now on our knuckles, he's actually moved where the tie rod end joins down by nearly 50 mil. This massively reduces bump steer. Now basically what Ackerman effect is, on most cars, when you turn the wheel, one wheel would turn more than the other. And on drift cars, you're often at full lock, and one wheel is further out than the other, giving you a toe out condition. You lose grip like this because the wheels are trying to fight each other in which direction they want to go. Now by moving this pickup point further out, it reduces the Ackerman effect and gives you more grip for drifting. Now the other benefit of moving the pivot out is you get more steering lock because it takes longer for the knuckle to hit against the lock stopper on the lower control arm. Now, by moving the tie rod end joint inwards, it actually makes for faster steering. Now it does actually make the steering a little bit heavier than normal, but Silvias have quite light steering to begin with, so the benefit is actually that you get increased steering feel and you actually know what's going up the front end a little bit better. Now the other benefit of having faster steering is you have increased steering lock. Now every turn of the wheel goes even further, and this means you can go further before you actually bottom out the rack. Pretty much you can have as much steering lock as you can fit inside your guards with these aftermarket knuckles. So if you want some for yourself, make sure you contact Nigel, because they really are the best bang for your buck modification you can do to either a drift car or a circuit car in your front suspension. Well, now that we've taken a look at the front suspension and steering and seen how we can make it better, it's time to put it in the car. So these are Kazama tie rod ends. They're good for two reasons. One, they're thicker than factory, so they're a lot stronger, so if you hit ripple strips and stuff, they don't break. And secondly, they actually have an extra lock built into them. This little round part here actually means that the tie rod can travel further inside the rack, giving the car more steering lock. Okay, this is a Nismo power brace. Now basically what it does is replaces the brackets at the front that hold the caster rod, and what they do is they weld this box section in to stop this from moving around and weld a bar in between so there's no movement between the caster rods. Personally, I think this is one of the most essential modifications you can ever do to any Silvia. They really do make a massive difference. Now the next upgrade we're doing on Jet 200 is a front brake upgrade. Now I've gone for these bad boys. Wilwood 6-piston super light calipers with a 330mm 2-piece rotor. The kit comes with everything. So you've got the caliper, you've got the rotor, braided line, and the bracket required to fit it onto the car. Now Wilwood brakes are very well known in the street machine scene. A lot of people use them on hot rods and V8s, but in America they're also very popular in the sports compact market. A lot of top level drift cars, including all of the Team Falcon cars, use Wilwood brakes. So it's good enough for them, it's good enough for me. Now one of the best things I like about Wilwood brakes is they're very, very light. This 6-piston caliper weighs less than the 1-piston rear caliper that you find on the Nissan. Now these rotors we're using are 330mm. Now you're probably wondering why I didn't go for something bigger like a lot of the other Time Attack cars in Pro Class, but this car is rear wheel drive and weighs under 1100 kilos, so you don't need to over brake the car. So we're hoping that this is going to be enough. Well, the brake kit's on. The only thing left to do is put the braided line on that comes with it, but that's some pretty boring stuff. So that's all we're going to look at this episode on the S14. Now we're going to go check out the S13 before we do the rear suspension in the next episode of Motive Garage.